This is Thursday, April 29th, Wayside Cleanup Office Hours. And thank you all for coming. The big items today is, let's see, I'll put it up on the screen, that this afternoon, where is that? There we go. We have our technical assistance grant meeting. If you know of people who might be interested in receiving technical assistance grants, if you work with communities, public involvement, playing groups, and the like, although it's not limited to PIP groups, then the meeting begins at 7 p.m. April 29th. It's on Zoom. You can quickly write that down or simply Google MassDEP tag TAG grant or meeting, and it should pop up at the top of the search. So we'll be there tonight. Nancy Fitzpatrick and Peggy Shaw and Liz Callahan will be conducting the meeting, and it will be recorded, so it will be available on the YouTube channel as well later for people who want to participate. And kind of the, it's a lot of standard stuff, but there is kind of complexities on applying for these things, and the logistics of the state kind of contracting and grant process, so that we really encourage people to at least view the recordings of the meeting to make sure that they get all the details right. It would be a shame to have a good application that doesn't meet some of these kind of financial and legal requirements. And since I'm not pretending to completely understand how to do all of that, I'll stop there and say, watch, either come to the meeting or watch the video later. The next, kind of speaking of money, we also have MOSPER grant awards coming up. We hope to be able to announce them soon. This was the first round of grants that we took in proposals last fall. So it's in the final stages of being approved, and we should be announcing those very shortly. Other thing I want to put up with the screen then, moving on to our favorite topic, which would be PFAS. The weekly private well PFAS update, private well sampling program. We're up to 132 results received. This is the official tally from the our internal database. So we're holding steady at about 2%, being above the 20 part per trillion MCL. These numbers obviously will change and on a daily basis, and depending on how quickly they update these. But so I wouldn't pay attention to the exact numbers as much as the trends holding steady of more than 95% being less than 10 parts per trillion. A handful we're seeing levels in the 10 to 20 ppt range, and then just a couple, 2% in the, I guess this is rounded about a little bit less than 2% at the moment, above the MCL, and that was me knocking on wood. Nothing so far above 90 parts per trillion in the imminent hazard range.
Well, what is DEP doing with the low-level hits? What are you doing about them?
The less than 20 parts per trillion?
Yeah.
So, a lot of what we're doing is talking, well, there's what we do with the homeowners, which is talking about what we found, what the potential health risks are associated with PFAS in general, the steps that they can take to, if they want to reduce their exposures, that they can, and all of this is in the longer term, from a DEP program point of view, we are trying to get a handle on kind of what's there at what concentrations and where it might be coming from. So in a larger sense, we are keeping and tracking these in the database. Internally, we will be looking at the geographic, distributions on a very, fine scale, and seeing what patterns might emerge from that. So there's both the public working with the homeowner and then the internal kind of policy questions that we'll eventually be trying to answer is what does this all mean?
Do those low hits get RTMs? Do they become disposal sites?
Well, a couple things. One is anything less than 20 parts per trillion is not reportable. So those are clearly being tracked separately. Anything above 20 parts per trillion, part of the agreement is they authorize us to make the notification for them. So that part is out of the way. And we are waiting for the most part, and this will be on a case-by-case basis, but in general, the presumption is that the homeowners are down gradient recipients of contamination, and at least for the time being, but on a case-by-case basis. So, no coming back and say, well, Paul said that they weren't issuing NORs to these sites yet. Sometimes we will when we have a clearer idea about where the PFAS is coming from and where the potential sources might be.
If you don't, do they automatically go into down gradient property status? Is that what you're saying?
Well, I'm saying that once the notification is taken care of, the DEP has flexibility in identifying who we give the NOR to and who we expect to do work. And we are
interesting.
Well, everybody isn't. If you have certainly accounted this in your sites, if keep in mind that where there are hazardous materials, at a site, there may be multiple responsible parties associated with that, both from a spatial point of view and from a time point of view, previous owners. And DEP does not necessarily give out NORs to every and all PRPs. Our tendency is to certainly give it to the most obvious one and work from there. Sometimes we give out multiple NORs, sometimes we don't. So you've encountered this flexibility before.
So at this point, for the wells that were greater than 20 and an NOR was filed, has it been sort of just held at DEP with an unknown PRP, or did the homeowner get one at this point?
We are not automatically giving the homeowner an NOR at this point.
So until you figure out where it's coming from, it's in the files, but there's no named PRP.
We are keeping track of it. We are.
That seems fair.
Depending upon what, again, this is all very case specific, and as you saw, we don't have a lot of cases at the moment. So I would hate to generalize based upon kind of what we're doing in these first two instances. But I would imagine that there are some of these wells are going to come up positive, and there is going to be a rather clear source nearby. And in those cases, we will likely issue an NOR to that likely source, or a very likely situation is that there is a likely or very suspect source nearby, and we will start off with a request for information. And for that, there are going to be some cases where we're going to scratch our heads and wonder where it might be coming from, where there is absolutely nothing nearby. And in the range of potential sources, there are things like septic systems. People relying on private wells often also are in areas that are served by their own septic systems. So there may be cases where there isn't a PRP, there isn't something that we would normally follow up on. And in some cases there will be. In some cases that will happen very fast.
Will the go ahead.
Are you getting well data to find out if these are shallow or bedrock wells?
yes, what are the follow-ups as we talk with the homeowners? And maybe I should have mentioned that when Larry first asked the question, is not only talking about the health impacts and what they can do to reduce exposure, but it is trying to follow up on the construction of the well, the depth, is it shallow, is it in bedrock, all of that to try to get better understanding of it. In some case, some of that information is actually asked in the forms that they fill out before the sampling takes place. But even in this, with the limited results so far, we're finding that people fill out the form and have their memory goes back a certain amount, but that actually getting positive results, elevated results, has a tendency to kind of focus their memory, and you get somewhat better, more thought put into it, I guess, after the fact. So we re-ask those questions to either confirm what they already had provided us, or if they said don't know, to follow up to see if we can get more information.
And I'm sorry, but did the exceedance of 20 trigger an IRA plan requirement?
We are presuming that they are down gradient property status. We're not giving them NOR. We were working with them to make sure that they take appropriate actions to reduce their exposures.
Paul, is my memory correct that the labs that DP is using are the Amherst and Lowell UMass labs?
No,
Oh,
that's not correct. Thank you
That
for
is
that
not correct.
question, Wendy.
Okay.
To clarify, it is kind of interesting. And first, let me remind everybody that this is actually the whole sampling program, the public and the private well sampling program funded by the legislature, is being run primarily through our drinking water program, although we have weekly meetings where pretty much everybody is involved in talk about PFAS. But the contracting and the coordination is being done through the drinking water program. They have brought on board University of Massachusetts and then and UMass Lowell working together to do a lot of the coordination work. So it's not the laboratories there; it's the staff, the researchers, the professors, the graduate students, and they are and people that they've hired. They are doing a lot of the outreach. They're doing the coordinating with the labs to get the sampling kits out there. So a lot of the stuff that the DEP staff, we can farm out to them, so our staff can focus more on the decision-making process and the things that only we can do.
yep. So
They had put out a request for laboratory assistance last year. So there are a number of labs. I forget how many they actually have under that contract. I'm going to say 5, but I'm probably wrong. And which labs they use and kind of is probably dependent for any particular case. Is probably dependent upon locations and lab capacity, that sort of thing.
great, thanks.
Well,
I believe the list of labs is probably on the DEP PFAS webpage if you wanted to get into that level of detail.
Well, will you mentioned there'll be a geographic sort of review of the data. Will that be presented on the PFAS website if someone was looking to buy a home in a certain area and wanted to see sort of regional information?
I believe it will eventually. Yes. Right now, they obviously only have a limited number of samples out there. The sampling program itself is kind of, I think, working to find an appropriate way to map things so that the individual homes aren't identified, but there's enough information about the areas to give people that kind of information.
Any patterns that you see so far in the hits? Certain towns? Is it random? Or?
There's really not enough to go on. I mean, here that's like we're talking 6 6 samples above 10, or something in that area. So there's not a lot yet. So yeah, we have a lot of other private well sampling from, say, the 21E site work, and what we do know and what you're seeing in this big blue, non-detect, is there are a lot of non-detects out there, which I hope continues. Again, knock on wood. So, and one of the things that indicates to me, I keep going back to, say, the Vermont soil database data set, and kind of what we're assuming in Massachusetts would be similar, is that while there are sufficient soil concentrations of PFAS that are out there, that at least we're not seeing a widespread background kind of elevated levels of concern for PFAS. And you're seeing a lot of non-detects and a lot of very low levels of PFAS. And so if you're looking away from areas where there are kind of known or suspect sources, which is kind of where a lot of our work has been focusing on the last few years, if you get away from that, then you're not seeing widespread problems. And the questions then become, and these are not atypical questions. If you get a hit, where does it come from? Well, how deep is well? Is in bedrock? Is it in overburden? Are there potential sources nearby, like septic systems versus industrial or commercial sources, that sort of thing? And I would not be surprised, just like any other type of contamination, if some of these hits that we're seeing, whether the low ones or the slightly higher ones, that they might be coming from something like septic systems, which is not to say that all septic systems cause it, significant PFAS contamination, but individual ones in certain cases might. So
But Paul, the caveat here is that you're sampling private drinking water supply wells, which it is they're probably not overburdened groundwater wells, right? So, I mean, they're not monitoring wells that are put out, right? They're drinking water wells. And so some of them may be quite deep. And so the fact that we're not seeing it doesn't really tell us what the shallow groundwater looks like.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
But I mean, obviously it's very important to assess the drinking water supply. So, and that was one of the things that came out of the Vermont stuff at, the St. Aubin or whatever, that it got deep into the groundwater at that location. But yeah, I mean, we could still go out and put in our shallow groundwater wells and find PFAS in areas where the drinking water well was not impacted.
Yeah, I'm not saying that this is all.
Right, I know.
the tell us everything sort of study. You take it for what it is and add to it. But there certainly were concerns that there was widespread contamination in all drinking water, public and private. And what we're seeing doesn't support that so far.
Yeah, I understand. But I mean, again, it's drinking water as opposed to just groundwater. And it just seems like another good reason why it might be important to try to move toward getting monitoring wells, GPS, and submitting data, much like New York and some other states, but primarily New York does, to try to, get a picture so that if people did sample for PFAS, you could put that on your map and try to see.
So New York and other states were you saying are requiring PFAS sampling for monitoring wells across the board?
Generally, New York is a command and control state, if you will.
That's why.
So yes, at least on my sites, I'm finding that they are, they're saying, oh, by the way, you know, add this now to your sampling regimen. Even on sites that are closed and you're doing it for like, you know, monitoring under engineered control.
Yeah, and I asked that question, you know, partly to get that response. That you know, DEP has been, Massachusetts DEP has been focusing on you're doing this within the construct of our current system, and you know, we ask people to look for oil and hazardous material that are or are likely to be present there, and we don't across the board require, you know, sampling for a laundry list of chemicals. And so our focus has been from that early guidance, the sampling guidance for PRPs and LSPs to evaluate your site like you would any other site and look at what's around in the area and sample for PFAS if there are potential sources nearby, or if the site itself is a potential source, and not necessarily to sample everywhere in all cases. I just wanted to kind of restate that.
Yeah, I understand it's different in Massachusetts, and
the
New York
tools
has got a program from DEC to try to find out statewide. In Connecticut, you know, and on corrective action sites, we got told, oh, by the way, add PFAS to your sampling. So
yeah,
every state is different.
And we are happy that those states are doing that, because we get to look at their data as well, and hopefully extrapolate to a very similar situation in Massachusetts. But that kind of sampling by fiat is probably unlikely to be here. So we're trying to do all of this work kind of within the current construct, which helps us answer some questions, but may leave some other questions out there for a while for the data to build and we get more information.
Paul, are the locations of those private well sampling, what is that public and the results public, or are they all kept private?
The individual locations, when it gets put up, the results will be kind of publicized. I think they, as you can see, it's just at the beginning of getting the results in. So I don't think they've built out kind of the public facing aspect of it, but the intent is to get that information out there to the public and in a way that kind of will give them an idea of kind of where the contamination is found without indicating, this particular house at 137 Main Street in this town. So that will be there. And the wells were sampled, or the locations were selected kind of with two considerations in mind. There were a group, each of the towns have been gridded out, and there's kind of a somewhat random selection guided by that grid. So it's not completely random, to make sure that there's coverage across each of the towns. And then there are additional samples that within the town that are targeted towards potential private wells around potential or suspect sources. So that information will be presented when kind of it accumulates a little bit more, I think. Okay, moving on from PFAS, unless it's something else. My last thing is just a little bit of bad news, good news, and it has to do with our personnel kind of leaving and coming. And this is more at the executive level, but it made me very happy yesterday to hear that, well, I knew Dan Seeger, our Undersecretary for Environment, was leaving to go back to the private sector. Dan had been at DEP before he went up to EEA. So it was great having Dan in that position, because when we kind of moved regulations and talked about the MCP, and this is from a very self-centered point of view, it was great having Dan there because he had worked with us at DEP and was familiar with what we do. And it was simpler briefing. So the bad news is that Dan is leaving, but the good news is Beth Card, who used to be our deputy commissioner for policy and my boss, is taking his position and will be the undersecretary for the environment and climate change. So it's great to have Beth coming back from her exile at MWRA. It was great having her there too, but it's good, especially as we'll be preparing to move the MCP final regs through.
Yeah.
It's not the easiest thing to brief people on, partly because there are a wide range of issues covered. It's not just one thematic, regulatory change. So it's good to have somebody, knowing that there will be somebody there who is familiar with what we do. So that was the bad news, good news. And with that, I'll open it up. Any other questions or things we want to talk about?
I just had an Oriole outside my window
Oh, cool.
and I could hardly stay seated. So I just have to share that.
Well, that's
I
good
put
news.
out
I put my Oriole feeder out yesterday, anticipating it should be coming. So
with,
send it this way, Liz.
yeah, Barry and I are in the same town, so they're around. But yeah, do you put out orange slices? That's what I used.
Grape jelly.
Oh, okay.
Gobble it up. Grape jelly.
Huh, interesting.
And Linda, to answer your question, it was in Torrance, California, which is about an hour from Capistrano.
Interesting. I think it's March 19th is the date every year when they celebrate the day of San Jose. And that's the day that the birds start to arrive. And there's a migration pattern. So that's not that far away.
They may have just been misdirected.
Yeah. So when the swallows return to Capistrano, obviously that has been tracked over many decades, if not probably longer. Has anybody seen anything about whether climate change has affected that arrival date? I think some of the things that are out there that the birds might be more on a schedule based on length of day and that sort of thing, but their food sources have been changing, the timing of the flowering of the plants and the coming out of the insects and all of that, so that there's the potential for the birds arriving kind of late in terms of their food supply. Because everything gets shifted up several weeks. I think now that I'm remembering this, I think at one of the LSPA annual meetings, we had you guys had a speaker. There was a speaker who wrote that book about Thoreau's notes. Yes, Wendy is shaking her head. Yes, my memory is bad, but there are bits and pieces of it that's coming back.
Yeah, I remember one of the things he said was he showed a map, and he said that in a certain amount of time, what's the current North Carolina climate will be the Massachusetts climate, and it was a relatively short amount of time in terms of migration and plants and animals and all that.
So Paul, in answer to your question, Scientific American in December 17th, 2019 issue, you had a news release then saying that a study in the journal Nature Climate Change suggests that rising temperature are causing birds to migrate a little earlier each spring. A journey home is shifting forward by a little less than 2 days each decade.
Well, that's pretty significant, considering if you're It's not even over the whole year. It's, you know, in a span of a couple months when you see that migration, and, you know, 2 days per decade is a significant fraction of that. Well, any other observations that you guys have? Last week was Earth Day. Get out and do anything fun?
We
I know
planted
you
trees.
shake your head.
We planted trees in the snow.
Ooh, nice. Our big news is kind of opposite that. The town DPW truck stopped in front of our house this morning and put a sign on the aging Norway maple tree in front of our house. And by May 12th, it will be gone.
Oh, are you gonna get the wood?
We still have pieces of branches that fell off that tree in the backyard. I don't think we need any more pieces of that. So my wife will, this culminates a almost decade-long endeavor on my wife's part to get the tree removed. So
No.
it's sad, but it does begin my campaign, which is will be more internal and not with the city, to replace it with one of the new American elm varieties. I don't have high hopes. I usually don't win those campaigns, but it would be cool. The town has, or the Friends of Elm Pond had got the town to agree, and they purchased and bought some of the American elm varieties to put down by the pond, and they seem to be growing pretty well. So very exciting to have them back.
Well, good luck in your quest to have one at your house.
Yeah, don't see that happening, but
Yeah.
I can always hope. Maybe surreptitiously plant it in the front yard and see how long I can get away with it.
Well, the free trees on Arbor Day went really fast this year. I mean, they were posted and they were gone within an hour or so.
Wow.
People want trees.
Who offered free trees?
The Arbor Day Foundation and states. I know Rhode Island did. I think I'm trying to remember. I don't know if it was statewide in Massachusetts. I think it was by communities. But you know, on Arbor Day, typically there is a tree giveaway, usually in partners with municipalities or something. But apparently they went really fast this year. I guess people are home.
Yeah.
Plant trees.
Well, I feel that you know, we have an obligation to have a tree in our yard because we're on the side of the street away from the telephone poles. And so we can, in theory, have taller trees. Because the branches would only interfere with our own power lines, not the community power lines. And they wouldn't have to trim it into, you know, bizarre shapes to avoid them. So I feel like we should have, you know,
Well, we had a tree killed by a gas leak.
well, I think that's what did this one in. Actually, we had a gas leak that, you know, I got a call at work, you know, from the town police saying, we need to enter your house. Do any of your neighbors have a key? Yeah, so we think that there is a long-term kind of low gas leak that then got worse and probably killed it.
Yeah, we had like ours and our neighbors, all of our trees just suddenly died and turned brown in the middle of like June a couple years ago. So when they took them out, but I was surprised. I found out that our town had an arborist and they had a tree replacement program, and they came and planted a new tree to replace it. So.
Well, if the gas itself didn't kill the tree and it was suffering long before the final gas leak actually happened, they had to put in a new gas line because the original one was so small they couldn't just put the new one through it. And the work that they had to do for that, cut through a lot of the root system. So, but it entertained the neighborhood toddlers for a couple days. So, which taking down the tree will also entertain them.
Well, in this case, it was a slow gas leak, but it killed trees far away from where the root
Oh.
system was in. But it killed the nitrifying bacteria that live on the roots. But,
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, well.
Okay, anything else to talk about today? Next week is May.
I posted that nature link in the chat.
Yep. Yeah, I'll copy that and put it with the talk. Well, have a good week. It's raining, which everybody knows. You know, if April showers bring May flowers, what do May flowers bring?
Pilgrim.
Pilgrims. Thank you.
I'm a little slow.
It is the most New England joke I know. Okay, well, I'll see you all next week then,
Bye, all.
or see you at 7 o'clock tonight for the technical assistance grant meeting, because what else would you be doing?
See you next week, Paul.
Take care.